other folks that I see more regularly. And just anyway, thank you all for coming to this event. It's so nice to see everybody here. I want to tell you a little bit about Darlene, and this is by way of lead up to a short video that we'll show in a few minutes. You know, in 1978, I had been doing advocacy on Micronesia, Marshall Islands issues. In Hawaii, as Chris mentioned, we had a group called the Micronesia Support Committee, and we were ensconced in a little one-room office at the Church of the Crossroads, where we mimeographed newsletters and put together slideshows and so on. And it was at a slideshow about nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands at a local conference here with university students. I finished the talk about Bikini and Eniwetok and bombs and exposure and so on and so forth. And as I was putting away my slide projector, a young woman came up and introduced herself. And for the Marshallese who were in this room, they will immediately appreciate that that was kind of an out of the ordinary thing for a Marshall Islands woman to do, to come up and introduce herself to an American that she had never met. So she came up and said, "Hi, I'm Darlene Keju. I'm from the Marshall Islands." And so we started chatting, and that obviously led to a few bigger things. But what was interesting was later on, what I found out from her was that she knew virtually nothing that was in my slideshow. And it really upset her. She was really upset that an American knew all this stuff and that she had no idea about it, not a clue. And moreover, she grew up on islands that were downwind of the nuclear tests, but just knew nothing about it. And it was this thing, seeing this slideshow and beginning to learn about this, which just fueled her interest to learn about the subject. And it led the next year to her saying, let's go back home and go out on a research trip and jump on one of the field trip vessels. These are passenger cargo ships that go island hopping throughout the Marshall Islands. And let's get on one of the ships and go up to the Northern Radak chain and interview people. And so we did. And you know, I mean, looking back on it, probably she was one of the first Marshall Islanders to actually go and research about the nuclear testing, like go talk to people about it. And this was only 20 or so years after the last tests had finished, so things were really fresh in people's mind. And I would say, like most Americans who were alive when John Kennedy was killed can tell you where they were when that event happened. Well, the Bravo test in 1954 at Bikini is an event for older Marshallese like that. They remember it, it's something that they know about. Well, anyway, as a result of all this, she got to be an extremely informed person about the nuclear issue, and one of the things that it did for her was it made her change her field of study, because her parents run a business, and her family still has a business on eBay. She had been in business school, gone to Kapiolani Community College, then Chaminade, got her AS degree and BS degree, all in business science and business marketing and all this great stuff. And then she wanted to get into public health because of her concern about the nuclear test. So she, at the time, the University of Hawaii opened up a new program, and she got into their public health program and ultimately graduated and then went back home. But while she was doing all of this, she was out talking to people about this. And you'll see when she speaks at this very significant event, which was the World Council of Churches Assembly in 1983, every 7 or 8 years the World Council gets together. So it's thousands of church people from all over the world. And this was the first time that the World Council had done a program on the Pacific. okay? And it was like they have all these member churches in the Pacific, but all they talk about is the Middle East and Africa and so on. So in 1983, the Pacific churches said, okay, it's our time. We want to be on the agenda. So they scheduled this big presentation on the Pacific, and they invited Darlene to be one of the 4 speakers on a panel. And it was kind of interesting because the other 3 were these very high up, learned pastors, bishops, and heads of churches from around the Pacific. Very significant personalities. And all of whom delivered rather remarkable speeches of their own, but they all read their speeches. And Darlene gets up and just tells a story. And her speech became like it was a phenomenon at this conference, the way it turned people on. And what it did was it sparked groups, people in Europe, to start setting up support groups and just to get interested in the Pacific, to learn about it. But you'll see at the beginning, she says something like, this is a very important occasion because I'm here to tell you my life story. Well, she, in a way, yes, it's hers, but it's also all of these Marshall Islanders that she had been out talking to about the nuclear test. So she felt that she couldn't listen to these stories, listen to what people were saying, reading all the documents, and then just go, oh, well, that's an interesting story. She had to get out and do something. She had to take some action on it. So being in the US, being somebody who knew how to speak English, could get up and speak, she was willing to do that, take that risk, because she was thinking about people on Iluk or Wotje or Likiap. First of all, most of the people on the Outer Islands don't speak English. But even if they did speak English, who are they going to talk to? Right? I mean, these are folks who had been exposed to fallout, and there's people in this room who know the story probably even better than I do. But there were very few people who were out talking about this issue. Well, anyway, she not only became this just incredible advocate for nuclear testing and people's rights at Kwajalein, but after she finished school here, she went home and started this amazing community health program through a youth group called Youth to Youth and Health. And the whole thing with her was she thought about her own experience coming to Hawaii as a teenager, not speaking English, going to Roosevelt High School and just sitting in the back of the class hoping nobody would call on her because she had about 3 words of English. And that pretty much sums up the experience of almost all Micronesians, Palauans, Micronesians, Marshallese who come to the US for the first time. At least it did in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And it's a real struggle. But she remembered that, and she also thought about all the things that she felt good about being a Marshall Islander. The music and the dance and the drama, the culture, all the things that made her super proud to be a Marshallese and to show that culture off and to grab an ukulele and sit down and just start playing some great music and things like this. And her thing with working with young people in the Marshall Islands was, this is such a powerful tool, and that we've got so many young people who are really deculturated. They're growing up in urban centers, in whether it's Majuro or it's Pohnpei or it's Koror or Ibai, doesn't really matter. It's in the last 20 years, it's the technology generation. Everybody wants to have hip hop, iPods, iPads, it's all this technology, but people are really disconnected from their own islands, their own culture. And so her thing was to get people involved in it and show how much fun it was. And in the process of having a great time, people were communicating ideas, learning about health, learning about leadership, becoming leaders. And that was the significance of her approach to public health, was she wanted Marshallese to be able to stand up on their own 2 feet and confront the world from a good point of view. Not say, oh, I can't talk to those people, they're too high up. And that was what she built into her program, Youth to Youth and Health, was creating, just taking at-risk kids who were just who they were out in the neighborhoods and training them, getting them involved in their culture, but providing a direction and environment that encouraged creativity, got the kids involved, and frankly, had a heck of a lot of fun doing it. And that was what was always the neatest. Well, her organization, or the one she started in 1986, is now in its 27th year of operation. And my comment about that is she died over 15 years ago, and normally you have a group with a key person, they move on, and the group crumbles. And I would say that shows you how the idea of Youth to Youth in Health resonate with Marshallese, because it just is a Marshallese created by a Marshall Islander with Marshall Islands ideas. So I don't want to say too much because, well, there's more food, most importantly, but I want to wrap up by mentioning that in 1983, when Darlene was still at the School of Public Health here at UH, all grad students had to do a summer fieldwork project. So she was already talking to lots of doctors and scientists about the nuclear issue, and she wanted to try to get a pilot epidemiological study done in the Marshall Islands to get some baseline information on health status of people in various parts of the country, because there's never been that kind of a study done. In spite of the fact all these nuclear weapons were tested there, generally there's very poor health data. So she put together a proposal, a plan of action, took it out, and met with all the health people and went through it. And unfortunately, it was a very political time because of the Compact of Free Association was coming up for a vote, and the push was to get the compact through because it would remove all the Marshallese nuclear claims which were in US courts for billions and billions of dollars, for a $150 million settlement in the compact. So there was a big push to get that through, and hers study was seen as a political thing at that time, so it didn't happen. But fast forward to 2012, 30 years later, a United Nations Special Rapporteur comes to the Marshall Islands last year to do a study about the US government's nuclear weapons testing from the standpoint of human rights. This was to be a report to go to the UN Human Rights Council. Well, the man who came out and did the Special Rapporteur's report did a really remarkable job of very even-handed report in terms of how he did it, came up with all these recommendations. But among his recommendations are that Marshall Islands needs studies by independent scientists and medical people, radiological health studies. So here we have, 30 years after Darlene was out trying to get it done, now you have somebody who has no connection with the Marshall Islands. He's a dispassionate reviewer. He comes in and says, it's obvious. These are some of the things that we need. And if you folks haven't seen it, the UN Special Rapporteur's report was out last year. It is a phenomenally comprehensive report about what should happen. Well, these are many of the things that Darlene was talking about back in the 1980s. So I think I'm going to cut short here and see if we can move to our film. It's only about 10 minutes, and we'll go from there, because I think Darlene is a much more interesting speaker than I am. So thank you very much.
As Pacific Islanders, we have come to Vancouver as people whose voices are not heard among the powerful nations.
I bring greetings from the Marshall Islands and throughout Micronesia. This is a very important event because I have come to share my life story. As you know, we have been under the United States government for for the last 30-some years. Soon after the World War II, when the United States had a fight with Japan, it signed a UN trusteeship agreement. This agreement was for the United States to protect our health and to prevent the loss of our land and resources. It promised that it would never happen. Before we knew it, our islands were blown up. The United States government did not bother to tell us that 4 of our islands, 2 in Bikini and 2 in Anguilla, were blown up the face of the earth. When the U.S. government officer came from Washington, D.C., he came and see the people of Bikini. He told the chief that the U.S. government were testing the bombs, and I quote, for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. The chief didn't know what that meant, because in 1946, none of us spoke English. So he thought the word mankind, it has something to do with God. So he told the U.S. officer, he said, in the name of God, I'm willing to let my people go. But there was one thing the U.S. officer did not tell the chief. He did not tell them that he and these people will never return home. But he told them that he would bring them home back very soon. So the Bikinians thought soon could be tomorrow, it could be next week, or it could be probably next month. And they were willing to sacrifice for it. But the sad thing about this is that the Bikinians did not know that they will be homeless forever. As you know, the Bikinians now today, their island is off limit forever because it's too radioactive. And then the United States government again decided Bikini was not enough. It has to test it again. It has to use one of our islands. And this time, it was Anguilla. There, it tested 43 atomic and hydrogen bombs. That's a total, in the entire island, the United States tested 66 atomic and hydrogen bombs. Since then, we have had endless of health problems. For example, we have hundreds of women who have miscarriages. We have leukemia cancers. We have thyroid cancers. We have stillbirth babies. We have nowadays, I just come back from home, and I've talked to many women and men in the population, that we have babies we call jellyfish babies. A baby is born on a labor table, and it moves up and down like this. It's a common or ugly thing. It's not shaped like a human being. It moves up and down, so it's on a labor table because that thing is breathing. That is a baby. And we have more than 10 of these all over throughout the islands. And although the Department of Energy who comes and look at us for our illnesses, it only looks at the people who are on the islands that have been considered contaminated, and that is raw and lubricant. And they only look at their throat. They will not. They refuse to look at their children. They refuse to look at the people who are come to the islands and have the similar kind of illnesses. Department of Energy sent us throughout the United States for the medical surgery on our thyroids. They sent us to New York. They sent us to Hawaii. They sent us to Guam. And still, that explains what is the matter with us. As if it's not enough, the United States decided once again to take our island, the biggest atoll in the world, Kwajalein Atoll. This time, they take our islands to use it for missile range. This is where the Vendors were based, that shot all his missiles. And as I understand, the NX missile, which they shot this June, was shot into our island. Use our island for missiles. They relocated the people into a very tiny little island. It's called Ebi. This island is only 66 acres of land. we are very sick, we have to have passes or special permission to go to the hospital on Fraudulent, which is U.S. Standard Hospital. But if we don't get any permission to go to the hospital, or the colonel is off the island, fishing, or maybe he's playing golf, then many times our children are going back from Fraudulent Pier to Ebi, and they're dead. This is why in summer of last year, about 1,000 Fraudulent Atoll landowners, they had what they call Operation Homecoming. And that was they sailed to the 2/3 of their islands, about 11 of their islands, peacefully. They took their women and children and they sat on the islands. Now you must remember, the U.S. government has taken 2/3 of our islands. It means we cannot go fishing, we cannot go visit our islands and get more food for the more than 8,000 people. But it means we're stuck into what we call a jail. Can you imagine? The United States government is only leasing our islands, and we have to have our own passes to go to our own islands. The Marshallese people today, along with the Micronesian, are fighting very hard for self-governing our nation, for independence. But we cannot do this alone without your support. Ask for your support in terms of having our islands to be the way they were. Because in our islands, it's very funny when the United States tell us that they are there to protect us. We turn around and ask them, protect us from who? We have no enemies. In fact, you might be interested to know that us Marshallese do not have a word for enemy. The Marshallese are dying out now. My island that is up in the north is also contaminated. I too have 3 tumors in me. I'm about to have a surgery. And I'm frightened. I don't know whether I should have children or not. Because I don't know whether I'll have a child that is like a jellyfish baby. I don't know whether I will have a child that has 6 fingers. A child that has horn on his head. We don't know what is going on. All we know is we must travel throughout the world and share this kind of experience from the bombs so that we will stop them before it gets to. Remember, we are the victim of the nuclear age. Don't become a victim.
And if you read the book, this nice lady appears in the book in a prominent location. Oh, yeah. How's that?
540211.
Good? Kababok. Kababok.
And for those who didn't get lucky, don't worry, you get lucky as well. If you have your book or if you don't, that's okay. These were supposed to be for signing the book, and you get to get the pen and the roses from Marshall Island. So I'll ask my sister to pass these around.
Joanne?
Arita, you owe me. Thank everybody for coming. For hosting and letting us use this facility. You know, they have been such strong advocates and proponents about Native arts and Native culture and Native literature. But for those of you who didn't have the privilege of knowing Darlene personally, I wanted to call out a couple people in the audience because if you've read the book, then you'll have a face to the name. If you haven't read the book, then maybe when you read it, you'll say, oh, that was the beautiful lady in the front row with the flower shade. Tita stand. Tita was Tita's family. Darlene's sister here. She lived with the Ramler family, and Dita grew up with her during their formative years. And
Yeah. When she first came to Hawaii, well, she stayed in one of their homes for a short time, and then she came and stayed in our home. So she was about 16, I think 15 or 16. And so we shared a room in our house. So she became my sister, and she was full of energy, full of humor, full of brought so much energy into the house, and we didn't want to let her go when Giff took her away. My mother especially. Yeah. So I'm so happy that Giff wrote that book, because it brought back so many memories, and just seeing her on the screen. Oh my gosh.
if you knew Darlene, she always had a little red journal, and every day she'd write in it. So I'm sure a lot of the words are quotes from her journal. So it's hard to read, though. Yeah, I mean, it just brings back a lot of memories. I was not doing Nuclear Free Pacific when I met Darlene. Actually, I went to see her oral at the School of Public Health because I was a year behind her, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go listen to this girl because this is going to be me next year. And she started speaking in Marshallese, and I thought, oh my gosh, she doesn't even realize she's not speaking in English. I mean, nobody understood her. For the first, I think, 10 minutes. And she said, well, now you know how I feel and how I felt when I came to Hawaii. And I didn't understand anybody. And she and I became close because we were both in family planning. We both like Audrey Hepburn. We both like the bossa nova. We both like shoes. Yeah. But she was quite special. One of the things that you could not be touched. If you knew her, you couldn't leave her being touched, knowing that if you were going to stand up for something you believed in, it was going to be a fight and it was going to be worth it. And we were lucky enough to also host when she brought the Youth to Youth and Health Youth to Hawaii. She brought 19 youth. And I was working at Rehab Hospital at the time. And the kids came and they sang and they danced. And there was a young boy who had had an accident, a surfing accident. And the therapist could not get him to respond. He had been in a coma. He had been in a wheelchair for about three weeks. And they started singing, and he started banging his tray, and tears started coming down his eyes. And then all the nurses started crying, and then the doctors started crying. And they kept saying, oh my God, if they keep this up, he's going to stand up and walk out of here. It was so infectious, the music. And she taught us a lot. So please, if you have not read the book, Dita certainly is one. Catherine Braun and Chris, who introduced Giff, did a lot of, Catherine, where are you? Oh, in the back, over there. Catherine Braun, they were part of the activists. I've been very fortunate to have great activist leaders in my life. She was one of the favorite I love to follow and work for because she was so awesome. I did get to see her about a week before she passed in the Marshall Islands, and she was no different and no less intense than she was on the screen. And I remember telling her, I said, Darlene, when you go, I can just see you now. You're going to be paddling in the lagoon to the great beyond. And it's going to be like maybe 5 minutes before you tell the guy, you know, if you paddle a little harder on your left, you would get there faster. And she goes, that's right. She goes, that's right. So she was that way. She was that way all the time. And she was so infectious. Johnny Shoda, I know, is also family to Darlene, right, John? Johnny Shoda is one of the bilingual health aides at the Department of Health. Nancy Alec worked with Darlene, with the Friends, the Friends, and there are others in the room too, so introduce yourself to others, so when you read the book, you can have faces to the names. But thank you all for coming. There's lots of food. Giff will will sign your books if you want. The books are on sale for $15. Yeah, you can ask questions, absolutely. Who said that? Oh, you.
There's so much that I want to ask you. I personally have been writing to you on email. I love Leonardo. I'm actually from Hawaii, and I've been through the AAC, NRC, over down walking as being downwinders. And I pretty much fell off the face of the earth when I got home because there was just really no support. We're just that's what I wanted to find out from you, if there's any other platform that I could stand on to continue the problem. But I also wanted to share that my grandfather is Orlando Auld. Back then, he was the person that the military, he worked for Hawaiian Dredging. He was the captain of the Hawaiian Dredging Company. Back then, he was hired to go to Marshall Islands and to help remove the people from Marshall Islands. He called home because he was really upset. He called home and he told my grandma, he said, if there's anyone that's pregnant, to please name them Marshall and Kwajalein. My brother's name is Marshall. My cousin's name is Kwajalein. I also want to say, in lieu of my brother, Marshall, he's no longer with us. And I suspect that my brother was part of the downwinders. In other words, what I'm seeing here, and I'm making a case, as the hydrogen bombs are being tested in Micronesia, it was always affecting us too. The women back then didn't say anything, but my mom said a few words to where I'm hanging on to. My mother gave birth to me in 1948, and I'm telling you my age. My brother was born in 1951. Between my brother and I, my mother had a baby, and she was a girl. Back then, the doctors gave women saline in their womb to abort their babies. And of course, being a Christian, my mother never said anything to anyone except to me. My brother has since died, and I suspect because of the downwind, and that we were affected by that. So that's the reason why I'm going before AEC. My grandfather wanted us to always remember what was going on and never to forget. So this is my work. I also was a student at the UH Manoa, and I was turned down by the public health department for my master's. So I didn't get in there. So it's interesting. As I was reading the whole book, and I did within 2 days, I had a lot of closure, so I just want to say thank you for writing the book. You did a lot of layering, so thank God, because I'm a layer person. I can understand and comprehend. The print was large enough to where I could use my glasses or not use my glasses. So I want to thank you for the strategies that you used to do that book. I don't know, but I'm hoping to continue on Darlene's work. I don't know if I can be successful, to be honest with you, because in the end, the 3 pillars, it's got us, and I really don't know how to battle the 3 pillars. So that's why I came tonight, not to speak in front of you, but to ask Giff about the 3 pillars and where do we go from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if people would like to get more food, please don't restrain yourself. What I'd like to say is I think your reference for people who haven't read the book, the 3 pillars is in the kind of the wrap-up of the book. But it's essentially the whole story of the U.S. cover-up of what actually happened with the Bravo test. And it's phenomenal what we know today, which just completely undermines the story that was put out from day one after the March 1, 1954 hydrogen bomb. The thing to me that is so significant about the situation in the Marshalls is if we just compare Marshall Islanders to American downwinders who live in the Nevada, Utah, Arizona area, what we can see is that the programs for compensation for both Marshall Islanders and downwinders are fairly similar in terms of they're based on a presumption because nobody kept data, nobody knows whether you got this much radiation exposure or the next person got whatever. So the presumption is if you lived in the Marshall Islands or if you lived in the Nevada, Utah, Arizona area during the testing period and you have a certain health problem, say breast cancer or whatever kind of cancer, then you're eligible for compensation. Well, in the Marshall Islands, the United States set up with the Marshall Islands a nuclear claims tribunal, an agency to adjudicate all the claims. So, and they were given a certain amount of money to do it. So it was set up, they did their job over 20 years, and they awarded about $90 million in personal injury claims, but had only $70 million to pay. So that means not a single Marshall Islander received 100% of their award. And also on land damage claims, which is about nuclear cleanup to US standards and things like that, they awarded $2 billion. The Marshall Islands has gone back to the US and said, well, look, here's the tribunal's ruling. So they say, sorry, we already did the compensation. That was back in the first compact, and that's full and final. But if you look at the downwinders in the US, the US law, what they do is, whenever they run out of money for the downwinders, the U.S. Congress just appropriates more. So they started out with an appropriation of about $100 million, and they're up to $1.8 billion in payout, fair and fairly. The people in the U.S. deserve to be compensated, no question about it. But think about this, is the lowest of what we know, because there's tons of reports and studies which have never been publicly released. But with what we know today, we can say that the lowest average exposure in Marshall Islands, the lowest average exposure is higher than the highest average exposure among the downwinders in the US. And it's obvious why. Because all the hydrogen bombs were tested in the Marshall Islands. The United States government couldn't test hydrogen bombs in Nevada for kind of obvious reasons, like public opinion. So all the big bombs were blown up at Bikini and Eniwetok and some at Johnston Island. That's another story. But the point being, there was so much more tested there. And yet the US government, if you look at the area in the Marshall Islands that is considered exposed and compare it to the Nevada, Utah, Arizona area, it's this little tiny piece compared to the Nevada area. And you just go, it's not fair. I mean, bottom line, it's not fair. And then when you say, well, we had the negotiations and they agreed to it, well, yeah, sure, we covered up all the information. The US government wouldn't release any of the reports, which would have told Marshall Islanders that they would have asked for more compensation. So I believe there are some opportunities, but it's not easy, particularly because the US Supreme Court has thrown out consideration of the court cases. So it's a challenge, there's no question about it, but there are still some really important issues on this, some very important issues of justice, and I think Marshall Islanders, many kind of feel like they're being ignored, especially like people from Rongelap and Utrecht, the ones who were there in ¡54, they're now in their 60s and 70s or they've passed on, and it's a challenge, when you're 70 years old to go out and lead a campaign. We're getting a little up there to be doing that, and the next generation maybe hasn't quite come along. So there are still many issues, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning, the United Nations Special Rapporteur's report is fascinating to read because of how he evaluates the situation and his recommendations, not only for the US, but for the United Nations and for the Marshall Islands, all the things that need to be done. And there are many. So I think if you get into this a little bit, if you read the book, you'll see that there are many points, things that Darlene touched on that linked things together.